Okay, so I'm going to tell you this story, and I already know how parts of it are going to sound. I know there are going to be moments where you think, Maya, come on, you're being a little dramatic, and honestly fair. I'm a dramatic person. I come from a dramatic family. We are Mexican-American Catholics from Orange County, which means drama is basically a second language we all speak fluently. But I'm asking you to stick with me, because this story has an ending that I genuinely did not see coming, and I've lived it. And if I didn't see it coming, I think you'll be surprised too. Let me start at the beginning. I grew up in Anaheim, California. Not the part near Disneyland, the real part where actual people live who aren't on vacation. We were on Chartres Avenue, in a beige stucco house with a cracked driveway and a lemon tree in the backyard that my dad had been meaning to trim since approximately 2004. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, and the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, but had enough decency not to say it directly to your face. You'd just hear about it from your cousin's girlfriend's mom at church. My dad, Roberto, worked for an HVAC company out of Santa Ana. He'd been there 22 years when this story starts. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that you learn to read carefully, because his silence meant 100 different things depending on which way his jaw was set. Silence with a relaxed jaw meant he was fine. Silence with a tight jaw meant something was wrong, and he was deciding whether to address it or wait for it to go away on its own. He usually chose waiting. That's important to understand about my dad. He was not a confrontational man. He loved peace the way some people love oxygen, desperately, instinctively, as a survival mechanism. My mom, Linda, was different. She was not loud exactly, but she had this quality of filling a room without meaning to. She worked part-time as a dental receptionist at a practice in Fullerton. She cared enormously about what people thought of us. Not in a vain way, exactly. More in an anxious way. Like she was perpetually worried that the family's reputation was a vase she was carrying, and if she put it down wrong, it would shatter. And then there was Daniel. Daniel is 3 years older than me. When this story starts, I'm 17 and he's 20. Look, okay. Daniel is the kind of person who is genuinely charming to anyone who isn't related to him. He has this easy smile and this way of looking at you like you're the most interesting person in the room. And strangers love him. Teachers loved him. My parents' friends loved him. He had this face that just made people trust him. Within the family, though. Well, Daniel had been the golden child for as long as I could remember. I'm not saying this to be bitter, or okay, I'm a little bitter, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. He was the firstborn son, which in my parents' household carried a specific weight that nobody ever acknowledged out loud but everyone felt. He got the bigger bedroom. He got a car for his 16th birthday, a used Honda Civic. But still, when he failed 2 classes junior year, my parents had a tense conversation with him and then it was over. When I got a B+ in AP Chemistry, my mom said, "You could do better if you applied yourself." That kind of family. I don't want to make it sound like my childhood was miserable, because it mostly wasn't. There were good years. There were Thanksgiving tamales and 4th of July at my uncle's house in Riverside and Summers, where everything felt open and possible. I was a decent student. I finished Anaheim High School with a 3.6 GPA. I was on the debate team. I'd gotten into Cal State Fullerton to study communications. I had plans. And then there was Nana Espe. My grandmother, Esperanza Castillo, lived in Garden Grove, about 12 minutes from our house. She'd lived in the same ranch house since 1971. It was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, orange shag carpet in the living room that she refused to replace because she'd had it for 40 years. And it was fine, thank you very much. She had a fig tree in the backyard. She kept holy cards on every surface. She called me Mija. And she made the best arroz con leche I've ever tasted in my life. And I've tasted a lot of arroz con leche in the pursuit of something that came close. Nana Espe was my mom's mother. She'd immigrated from Jalisco in 1968, married my grandfather Ernesto, had 4 kids, my mom Linda, my uncle Victor, and 2 others who moved out of state years ago and are peripheral to this story. Ernesto died in 1998. Before I was really old enough to understand what loss meant, and Nana had lived alone in that Garden Grove house ever since. She was sharp. That's the thing I need you to understand. People look at a small, elderly Mexican woman and they make assumptions, and those assumptions were wrong. Nana Espe read 3 newspapers a week. She had opinions about local politics. She beat my dad at cards consistently, and she knew it and she enjoyed it. She was not a woman who could be easily fooled. When I was a kid, I spent more time at Nana's house than almost anywhere else. Daniel was older. He had friends, he had stuff to do. I was the little sister with nowhere to be, so I'd sit at Nana's kitchen table and she'd teach me things. How to make tortillas, how to read a recipe and know instinctively when something was missing, how to listen to people when they talked. Because the thing they said last was usually what they actually meant, not the thing they said first. She was the kind of grandmother who made you feel, without ever saying it directly, that you were worth paying attention to, which was not the feeling I got at home exactly. I'm not trying to be dramatic, that's the thing. I genuinely loved my parents. I still do, mostly, in the complicated way you love people who hurt you. But the favoritism in our household was a specific, quiet, constant thing. Like the hum of a refrigerator. You stop noticing it until it's too loud to ignore. Daniel dropped out of community college in 2012. He moved back home. My parents had a conversation, it lasted maybe 3 days, and then he was just living in his old room again and working part-time at a tire shop in Buena Park, and nobody talked about it like it was a problem. The following year, when I got my Cal State Fullerton acceptance letter, my mom cried. Good tears, proud tears. But the practical conversation that followed went like this. We can help with some expenses, but Maya, you're going to need to work too. Financial aid should cover most of it. There's this program where you can do work study. We'll figure it out. This was not unreasonable. We were not rich. My dad made decent money, but not great money, and I understood that. What I noted, privately, silently, in the way you note things when you're 17, and smart enough to see the math but not old enough to know what to do with it, was that Daniel's dropped community college tuition. 2 semesters, maybe $3,000 had just been absorbed. No work study, no figure it out, just absorbed. But okay. I was going to college. I was excited. I had plans. September 2013 was when things shifted. Nana Espe had a fall. It wasn't dramatic, not a broken hip, nothing that required surgery. She tripped over the edge of the orange carpet in the living room and caught herself on the side table, bruised her hip, scared herself. But it was enough that her doctor at UCI Medical Center suggested she start having someone check in on her more regularly. My mom immediately volunteered. And she did, genuinely, for a while. She'd go over after work twice a week. She'd bring food. She'd help Nana with appointments. But my mom was working, and my dad was working, and Victor, Uncle Victor, lived in Temecula with his wife Patricia, which is about an hour south, and he was very busy, you see. Very busy. He had a real estate business. He had his own life. He came for Christmas and Easter. And that was the arrangement that everyone had silently agreed to without discussing it. So when my mom said, one evening at dinner in October of my freshman year, Maya, you know Nana loves when you visit and you don't have class on Fridays. Maybe you could stop by in the morning? I said yes. Of course I said yes. I loved Nana. That was October 2013. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because the timeline is something I've turned over in my head probably 10,000 times, and I want to make sure I tell it accurately. 1 Friday became 2. 2 Fridays became Mondays and Fridays. By spring semester of my freshman year, I was stopping by Nana's house 3 days a week. By my sophomore year, I dropped 1 class because the schedule was hard to manage. My mom said it was temporary. My dad said I was a good girl for helping out. Daniel, and this is important, I need you to remember this. Daniel was living at home, working 4 days a week at the tire shop, with 3 full days free. He went to Nana's house maybe once a month, sometimes less. Nobody asked him to go more often. I noticed this. I didn't say anything. I was 20 years old. I was conflict avoidant in the way that people who grow up with conflict avoidant fathers often are, and I told myself, it's fine, it's temporary. Nana will stabilize, Mom will find a system, I'll get back on track. The thing about temporary is that it has a way of becoming permanent if you're not paying attention. And I was not paying enough attention. By 2016, I was 20 then, technically still enrolled at Cal State Fullerton, but down to 6 units a semester, which is barely full-time. Nana's needs had increased significantly. She had early-stage type 2 diabetes, arthritis that made it hard to cook and clean independently, and a cardiac event in February of that year that scared the entire family enough that someone needed to be with her more consistently. That someone was me. I want to be fair here. My mom increased her visits. She really did try, but she had her job and her own health stuff. She'd been having back problems. And my dad, bless him, would go on weekends and fix things around Nana's house, practical things, the kind of help he knew how to give. But the daily rhythm of it, the showing up and making sure she took her metformin and ate something and didn't try to carry laundry down the back steps, that fell to me. I told myself, this is what you do for family. And honestly, I don't regret those years with her. I want to say that clearly, because the rest of this story is angry and complicated, and I don't want you to think that I resent the time I spent with my grandmother. I don't. Those afternoons in her kitchen, helping her make things she'd made for 60 years, listening to her talk about Jalisco and my grandfather and the early years in California when everything felt both enormous and possible. Those are some of the best memories I have. She was funny. She was sarcastic in a way that nobody in my family talked about, but I saw it. She'd say something like, "Victor called. He says he'll visit next month," and then pause and just look at me with this expression, and we'd both know exactly what that pause meant. She saw things clearly. What I was losing in those years was less obvious in the moment. My social circle at Cal State Fullerton drifted away. People who are in school full-time and going to parties and figuring out who they are in the way that 20-year-olds are supposed to don't have a ton of patience for a friend who's usually busy. Always talking about her grandmother's appointments, perpetually canceling plans. I'm not blaming them. I just want to be honest about the cost. I also lost track of myself in a way that took me years to name. There's this thing that happens when you become a caregiver, especially a young one. Especially one who wasn't formally designated as such. Nobody calls you a caregiver. They call you a helpful daughter or a good granddaughter, and you don't realize that you've restructured your entire life around someone else's needs until one day you're 23. And you can't actually remember what you wanted to do with your life before this started. Daniel, in this same period, had left the tire shop and done a thing where he tried to start a pressure washing business that lasted 4 months, then worked at a bar in Huntington Beach for a while, then briefly moved in with a girlfriend in San Diego, then moved back home. Each of these transitions was treated by my parents as a temporary detour, a young man finding his way. Each visit he made to Nana's house was met with fanfare. "Danny's here." Like it was a special occasion. The bar had been set so low for him that clearing it required essentially nothing, and clearing it still got him praised. I noticed. Every single time I noticed. I didn't say anything, mostly. Occasionally I'd say something to my mom, carefully, and she'd say something like, "Maya, your brother is going through a hard time." And I would think, when is his easy time? When does that start? But I would not say that out loud because I did not want to be the difficult one. Here's a moment I think about a lot. It was Thanksgiving, 2017. I was 21. Nana Espy was at our house for the holiday, which took about 2 hours of logistics to arrange. Making sure she had her medications, helping her into the car, making sure she was comfortable. I'd done most of that. Daniel arrived 20 minutes after we sat down to eat, walked in with a 12-pack of beer and a bag of chips, sat down and received the warmest welcome of the evening. "Danny, you look good, Mio." He did look good. He always looked good. That was the infuriating part. I was sitting next to Nana. She reached over under the table and patted my hand. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with those dark eyes and she patted my hand. And in that moment, I understood that she saw exactly what was happening. She saw all of it. I've thought about that hand pat probably 1,000 times since then. By 2019, Nana Espy's health had declined enough that the question of daily care became impossible to avoid. Her diabetes had progressed. She had a minor stroke in April, not catastrophic, but enough that her doctor at UCI Medical Center, a Dr. Anita Sharma, was very clear that Esperanza could not be living alone, full stop. Options were a care facility, a live-in aide, or a family member. Uncle Victor drove up from Temecula for a family meeting. He came in looking polished. Victor always looked polished, tan and silver-haired, and wearing the kind of casual clothes that are somehow expensive. And he sat at our kitchen table and talked about how he wished he could do more, but, the business. Patricia's mother was also having health issues. It just wasn't possible. He was so sorry. He would, of course, help financially. He said that last part, looking at the table. He did not help financially. Daniel was not at that family meeting. I don't actually know where he was. It simply did not occur to anyone to require him to be there. The decision, made primarily between my parents and my uncle, and with my input treated as a given rather than a choice, was that I would move in with Nana. I moved into Nana Espy's second bedroom in June 2019. I was 23 years old. I was 5 classes short of a bachelor's degree that I would not finish for years. I had $2,200 in a savings account, and I drove a 2009 Toyota Corolla with 140,000 miles on it that I'd bought with money I'd saved from a part-time administrative job. I then had to quit because I needed to be home. I want to stop here for a second because I know what some people are thinking. And they're thinking, why didn't you just say no? That's a fair question, and the honest answer is complicated. Part of it was love, genuine, real love for my grandmother. Part of it was the way I'd been socialized in my family, to be the one who adapted, the one who accommodated, the one who made things work. Part of it was that no one explicitly asked me. It was presented as the obvious solution, the natural next step, in the same way that "Can you stop by on Fridays?" had been presented 6 years earlier. Part of it was that I looked around the table at my family's faces, and I thought, if I say no, who does this? And the answer was nobody. The answer was that Nana would end up in a care facility, alone, which would have gutted her. So I said yes, and I moved into Nana's second bedroom, into the house with the orange carpet and the fig tree and the holy cards on every surface. And I became her primary caregiver at 23 years old. The next 4 years are hard to explain to people who haven't done it. Caregiving, the specific texture of that life. It's not glamorous, it's not dramatic in the way that people imagine. It's not an emergency every day. Mostly it's showing up. It's making sure she takes her medications in the right order at the right time. It's monitoring her blood sugar. It's sitting with her through the appointments at UCI Medical, which were frequent enough that I eventually knew the parking structure layout better than I knew my own neighborhood. It's the 2 a.m. wake-ups when she's disoriented and scared. It's the small losses, the things she could do last year that she can't do this year. Watching a person you love become a smaller version of themselves in physical terms, while somehow remaining entirely, completely themselves in every way that matters. Nana Espy remained entirely herself until very nearly the end. She still watched the news. She still had opinions. She still beat my dad at cards when he came on Sundays, though she needed help holding them by 2021. She still made me feel, in 100 small ways, that she saw me. That what I was doing mattered. During this time, Daniel visited. I want to be accurate. He visited more than he had before. Maybe once every 3 weeks, sometimes twice a month toward the end. He would come and sit with her, and they'd watch TV, and he'd bring her these Mexican pastries from a panaderia in Santa Ana that she liked, and she was always happy to see him. I'm not going to pretend she wasn't happy to see him. She was happy to see everyone she loved. But there's a difference between visiting and doing. There's a difference between showing up with pan dulce and being there at 6 a.m. to help someone to the bathroom when their hip is hurting. Daniel showed up with pan dulce. I was there at 6 a.m. I was always there. Victor came for Christmas 2020 and again in the summer of 2021. Each time, he walked through Nana's house with this proprietary energy that I noticed but couldn't quite name at the time. He'd say things like, this neighborhood has really improved. Or, the lot size here is actually quite good. Real estate brain. He was always looking at the house the way you look at a thing you plan to eventually own. The house, by the way, was paid off. My grandfather had paid it off in 1989. It was worth somewhere around $680,000 by 2021, because this is California and that's what happens to houses here. Nana also had savings. She'd been careful her whole life, never spent extravagantly, had a pension from a job she'd held for years, Social Security. She had approximately $47,000 in her savings account at Citibank, plus the house. Nobody talked about this openly, but everybody knew about it. That's another thing I want you to understand. The money was a presence in the room at every family gathering without anyone ever naming it. In early 2022, Nana's doctor at UCI Medical told us that her heart was weakening. Nothing acute, nothing that required emergency intervention yet, but a progression that meant we needed to start thinking about next steps, about hospice potentially, about what her end-of-life wishes were. Nana, to her credit, had been remarkably clear about her wishes for years. She'd had a will. She'd had an advance directive. She was not confused about death or afraid to discuss it, which is more than I can say for the rest of the family. That summer, things changed with Daniel. It started subtly. He started visiting more. Which, fine, I thought. Good. Maybe he finally understands that she needs people around her. But the visits had a different quality than before. He'd take Nana on these little drives, to the panaderia, to the park nearby, nice things, but he started asking her things. About the house. About her finances. I'd walk into the living room and the conversation would shift, almost imperceptibly, and I'd wonder if I was imagining it. I wasn't, as it turned out. But I get ahead of myself. The moment that broke something in me, or maybe broke it open, I'm still not sure which, happened in August 2022. Nana was in her room resting, which she did every afternoon by then, and I was in the kitchen making dinner, and Daniel was in the living room, and Victor and Patricia were visiting, because they were visiting more frequently that year for some reason, and I heard them talking. I wasn't eavesdropping. I want to be clear. I was standing at the stove, making chicken soup because Nana's appetite was declining, and she could still eat soup. And the kitchen shared a wall with the living room, and the house was old and the walls were not thick. I heard Victor say, the market in Garden Grove right now is really favorable. I heard Daniel say, yeah, I know, the lot especially. I heard Patricia say in this soft, careful voice, of course we'd want to make sure Mama's comfortable first. That goes without saying. Silence. Victor again. The question is really about timing. I stood at that stove with the wooden spoon in my hand, and I felt something that I can only describe as a cold that started in my stomach and spread outward, like I'd swallowed ice. My hands were steady. I remember that distinctly. I was surprised my hands were steady, and the soup was simmering, and in the other room, my family was discussing the timing of my grandmother's house like she was an inconvenience to be managed on the way to an inheritance. She was 20 feet away. She was in her room. She could hear the television down the hall. She was 20 feet away from her son having that conversation. I did not confront them that evening. I should have. But I was 26 years old, and I was exhausted in a way that is hard to explain to people who haven't been a caregiver. The bone-deep tired that doesn't go away with sleep. That becomes the baseline of your existence. And I was also, honestly, in shock. I'd suspected the circling for months. Hearing it in plain language was different. I told my mom that night, after everyone left. I called her from the hallway of Nana's house, keeping my voice low, and I told her what I'd heard. There was a pause that lasted long enough that I could hear traffic on her end of the line. Maya, she said finally. They were just talking, Mom. They were talking about the timing, while she was in the other room. Victor is just. He thinks about these things. He's practical. He was talking about selling her house. Nobody's selling anything. She's still alive. That word, still, landed in a specific way. I know she's still alive, I said. I know because I'm here every day. Silence. I waited for her to acknowledge what I'd just said, the everyday part, the I'm here part. She didn't. "Just don't stir things up," she said eventually. "It doesn't help anyone." I hung up the phone and I stood in the hallway of my grandmother's house with the holy cards on the wall and the orange carpet and the fig tree outside, and I thought about what "don't stir things up" meant when the pot was already boiling, and I thought about the 6 years I had given to this, the years I had handed over without being asked to account for them, and I felt, I want to be honest. I felt furious, and then I felt guilty for being furious, because Nana was still alive, and her dying was not the appropriate time to be angry about inheritance. And then I felt furious again, because the anger wasn't about inheritance. It was about the conversation I'd just had with my mother, where I'd told her something that upset me, and she'd told me not to stir things up. It took me a while to untangle those feelings. I'm not sure I had them fully untangled when the next thing happened. The next thing happened in October 2022. I found out about it later. Not immediately. I pieced it together from different sources over the following months, and I'll tell you what I eventually came to understand. Daniel had been researching something called a transfer on death deed, which is a California real estate instrument that allows a property owner to designate a beneficiary who automatically receives the property when they die, bypassing probate. It's a real thing, it's legal. And at some point in late 2022, Daniel had drafted one, or had someone draft one for him, that would transfer Nana's Garden Grove house to him upon her death. He wanted Nana to sign it. I don't know exactly how he approached it. I know that he visited more frequently that fall. I know that at least once he was at the house when I wasn't there. I'd gone to pick up her medications from the CVS on Chapman Avenue, a trip that took about 40 minutes, and I came back and Nana was in the living room, and Daniel was at the kitchen table with some papers. And when I walked in, he put them away quickly, and I asked what they were, and he said, "Just some stuff I was looking over, and I didn't push. I should have pushed." What I know now, because it came out later, Nana didn't sign. She didn't sign because she knew what it was. And she didn't sign because she'd already done something, 2 years earlier, that made Daniel's whole plan irrelevant. But I didn't know that yet. In October 2022, I just knew something felt wrong, and I was too tired to figure out what it was, and Nana seemed fine. A little quieter than usual, maybe, but she was having a hard month physically. She died in March 2023. I'm not going to spend a lot of words on the dying itself, because it was private and it was hers, and some things don't belong in a story like this. What I'll say is that she was at home in her own bedroom, in her own house with the orange carpet, which is what she'd wanted. I was with her. My mom was with her. My dad came and held her hand. She died on a Tuesday morning in early March, and the light in her room was the thin winter California light that comes through old curtains, and it was quiet. Daniel arrived 2 hours after she died. Victor arrived from Temecula that evening. Within 48 hours, the conversations about the house had started. Victor had brought a real estate agent friend, brought him to my grandmother's home 48 hours after she died, who walked through and gave an informal estimate. Patricia started talking about which pieces of furniture were antique and might be valuable. Daniel asked me, casually, almost as an aside, whether I'd been thinking about where I was going to live. I had not, in fact, been thinking about where I was going to live. I had been thinking about my grandmother. I had been thinking about the fact that the woman who had patted my hand under the Thanksgiving table, who had called me Mija, who had told me when I was 23 and scared that what I was doing was the most important thing a person could do. I had been thinking about the fact that she was gone, and that the house still smelled like her, and that I didn't know how to be in it without her in it. But apparently we were talking about real estate. Apparently that was where we were. I stayed quiet. I'm not proud of this, but I stayed quiet, and I helped plan the funeral. And I hosted the reception at Nana's house afterward. Because of course I did, I lived there, and I smiled at the people who came and accepted their condolences and brought out the food that the church ladies had dropped off and refilled the paper cups with coffee. And I did not scream once, which I consider an impressive act of self-control. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Nana had done this through an attorney, a woman named Elena Guzman, who had an office on Harbor Boulevard in Fullerton. I didn't know anything about the will beyond the fact that it existed. I assumed it had been written years ago. I assumed Daniel would get something, and Victor would get something, and my mom would get something, and maybe I would get something, a token thing, sentimental. I had not let myself think about money, because thinking about money felt like the same thing as what Victor and Daniel had been doing, which I did not want to be. I drove to Elena Guzman's office on a Wednesday morning in late March 2023. My parents were there. Daniel was there, wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before, looking like he was ready for a job interview. Victor and Patricia drove up from Temecula. Patricia was wearing a black wrap dress and had this practiced expression of solemn grief that she put on like a costume. We sat in the conference room. Elena Guzman was a small woman in her 60s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a manner that was precise and kind simultaneously. She expressed her condolences. She explained the process, and then she read the will. Victor was left Nana's jewelry, a collection of gold pieces from Mexico that had sentimental value and some actual value. My mom was left the china set that had been a wedding gift in 1968. My dad was left the tools in the garage, which was an oddly specific and touching bequest, and I later found out Nana had told my dad directly that they were his, and my dad had cried about it, which is one of the very few times I've seen my father cry. Daniel was left the fig tree. I want to let that sit for a second. The fig tree. In the will, as Elena Guzman read it, Nana had specifically designated the fig tree in the backyard as Daniel's bequest. There was a note in the will that said she hoped he would learn to tend something and watch it grow. I did not laugh. I am proud of myself for not laughing. I could feel the laughter rising in my chest, and I pressed my thumbnail into my palm until the urge passed. Daniel's face had gone a specific color, a kind of pale gray beige. Victor leaned over and said something quiet in his ear, and then Elena Guzman said my name, to my granddaughter Maya Antonia Reyes, who gave me her years without being asked and never once complained. Elena paused here, looked up at me, and I realized she was choosing to look at me deliberately, and I felt the back of my throat tighten. I leave the house at 4412 Maple Avenue, Garden Grove, California, and all its contents, and my savings account at Citibank in full. The current balance as of the date of this document is $47,200. The room was very quiet. I couldn't feel my hands. I remember there was a clock on the wall of the conference room, one of those institutional clocks with a second hand that moves in little jerks, tick, 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 and I watched it for what felt like a long time while the information rearranged itself inside my head. The house. Nana's house. My house. Now $47,200, Daniel said. What? Victor said, there must be some mistake. Elena Guzman looked at Victor over her reading glasses with an expression that communicated, without any words, that there was no mistake. She had, she said, a copy of the will that had been filed with the county, signed and notarized, updated in January 2021, and it was entirely legal, January 2021, 2 years before Nana died. 2 years before Daniel had started visiting with his papers and his careful questions about finances. 2 years before Victor had stood in Nana's living room and talked about market timing. She'd known. She'd looked at all of it with those clear, sharp eyes of hers, and she'd made her decision quietly, and then she'd gone back to watching the news and beating my dad at cards, and she hadn't said a word. Daniel was talking. I registered it distantly. He was saying something about expecting more, about being the grandson, about how this wasn't what she would have wanted. I found that last part almost funny, in a bleak sort of way. Daniel explaining what Nana would have wanted to the attorney, who had sat with her and documented exactly what she wanted. Victor said they would contest it. Elena Guzman said they were welcome to try, and explained, still with that precise and kind manner, that the will had been prepared and witnessed properly, that Esperanza had been of entirely sound mind at the time of drafting, and that they were free to pursue legal action if they wished, but would likely find the result unsatisfying. My mother had not said anything since her name was read. She was looking at the table. I looked at her. I'd been trying not to look at her directly since we sat down, but now I looked at her, and she looked up and met my eyes, and there was something in her expression that I had to spend weeks parsing afterward. It wasn't surprise. She didn't look surprised. She knew something. I found out what she knew about 3 months later. And that's where the story gets complicated in a different direction. When I finally sat down with my mom, really sat down, just the two of us, in her kitchen in Anaheim in June 2023. She told me that she'd known about Daniel's attempt to have Nana sign the transfer document. She'd found out because Daniel had mentioned it to my dad one night, casually, thinking my mom wasn't listening. He'd asked my dad if he could talk to the old lady, soften her up a little before Daniel brought the paperwork over. My mother had heard this. She had not told me. She had not told Nana, except. And this is the part that took my breath away when I understood it, except she had. She'd called Nana the next day. She hadn't told me she'd called. But she'd called, and she'd told her mother what Daniel was planning, and Nana had listened and said, "Mija, I already took care of it." She already had. The will had been updated in January 2021, more than a year before Daniel's transfer deed scheme. Nana had seen it coming before it had even happened. She'd taken care of it quietly on her own, and then she'd gone back to watching the news and trusting that the right thing would happen. My mother had known all of this. She'd known since the phone call that Nana had already handled it. She'd watched Victor and Daniel circle and plan and posture for 2 years, knowing all along that they were going to be stopped cold. And she hadn't said a word to me, or to anyone, because she'd made a promise to her mother to stay quiet, and she'd kept it. I'm still processing this. I'll probably always be processing this. On one hand, my mother chose to protect her mother's plan. She kept a secret for 2 years because Nana asked her to. That's loyalty. That's love of a kind. On the other hand, I was living in that house for 2 years, watching Daniel angle for it, watching Victor calculate, feeling like I was invisible, feeling like the work I was doing was unacknowledged and would be unrewarded, and my mother knew. She knew I was going to be okay, and she didn't tell me. She let me carry that weight and that dread without saying, "Maya, I promise it's handled." Maybe she thought the certainty would change how I behaved. Maybe she was afraid of what would happen if Daniel found out before the will was read. Maybe she just couldn't figure out how to have the conversation. I've asked her. Her answers have not been fully satisfying. I think there are things she did wrong, and I think there were things she did right. And they live in the same body, in the same story, which is something I've had to accept about her. Daniel and Victor did contest the will. I want to be honest about this part. It was expensive and stressful. I had to get my own attorney, a woman named Jasmine Park, who worked out of an office in Irvine and was sharp as a blade. And there were months of legal back and forth and filings in Orange County probate court. I won't pretend it was easy, because it wasn't. There were days when I wondered if it was worth it, when the legal fees scared me, when Daniel called me and said things designed to make me feel guilty that worked better than I'd like to admit. But Nana's will was airtight. Elena Guzman had done her job well, because that was what my grandmother had wanted and had paid for. The contest was ultimately dismissed. The house was mine. The $47,200 was mine. I was 27 years old and I owned a house in Garden Grove, California, free and clear. I went back to Cal State Fullerton in the fall of 2023. Part-time, working around a paralegal certificate program I'd started at UCI Extension. 5 classes to finish. I finished them. Daniel is, as far as I know, still figuring things out, still charming strangers. Still 20 steps behind where he could be if he'd ever been asked to actually work for something. He doesn't call me. I don't call him. We exist in the same family orbit at a distance that is comfortable for both of us, I think. Though comfortable isn't quite the right word. Victor and Patricia did not come to Nana's house. Victor sent a card at Christmas. I did not respond to it. My dad and I are fine. My dad and I were always fine. in that quiet way we have with each other, where we don't say much but we understand each other. He comes to the house sometimes on Sundays, like he always did when Nana was alive, and he fixes things around the place, and we have coffee. My mom and I are a work in progress. That's the most honest thing I can say. I love her. I'm still angry at her in a low-level, managed way. She loves me. I think she is trying to understand the things she got wrong, though she's not very good at saying so directly. We have dinner sometimes. It's not easy and it's not Hollywood, and I'm not sure it will ever be entirely uncomplicated. But here's what I know. I know that Nana Espy sat in her room in the evenings while I was making dinner, and she thought about who had shown up, who had been there, not who had been charming and who had brought pan dulce and who had arrived 2 hours after she died with paperwork drafted, who had actually been there. And she made a decision, quietly and with full clarity, 2 years before anyone else knew what was coming. I think about her all the time. I think about her in the kitchen of the house, which still has the orange carpet, which I have still not replaced, because I'm not ready to. I think about her at Thanksgiving and Christmas and on random Tuesdays in a way that surprises me with its frequency and its sharpness. I think about that hand pat under the table in my parents' house, November 2017. She saw me. She always saw me, and she made sure I knew it in the most final and uncontestable way she could find. That's the story. I still have the fig tree, by the way. I learned how to tend it. It produces more figs than one person can possibly eat. I don't mind.